The first time we did a river that we didn't know much about, and it was in territory we knew nothing about, was the Hood. It wasn't a first descent by any means. Others had done it. But, boy, it was all new to us. We're in the Barren Lands. We're way above the tree line. We finish on the Arctic Ocean. We saw Wilberforce Falls, one of the highest in Canada that nobody ever gets to see, much higher than Niagara, and quite spectacular. The Hood River had a bit of everything.
That is Ted Johnson. He is one of Canada's most experienced Arctic paddlers. Over many decades, he's canoed remote wild rivers across the Canadian North, right up into the high Arctic. His paddling partners on these adventures have included senior diplomats, journalists, and bureaucrats, and at least one former Prime Minister, his ex-boss, Pierre Trudeau. He's also a fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, the Royal Geographical Society, and an officer of the Order of Canada. I'm really thrilled to have Ted Johnson as our guest on this special Canoe Series edition of Explore, a Canadian Geographic podcast. Welcome to all you explorers out there, armchair and in motion. I'm your host, David McGuffin. I first heard about Ted Johnson and his crew of Arctic paddlers about 20 years ago from the Canadian diplomat Robert Fowler. We were in Darfur together at the start of a war there that is still sadly raging to this day. I was reporting on it for CBC. Fowler was the Canadian envoy sent to see what more Canada could do in terms of finding peace there. General Romeo Dallaire was also along with us. With temperatures topping 50 degrees Celsius some days and genocide going on all around us, we sought relief from all that by talking about home and canoeing adventures we'd been on in cooler, calmer places. Fowler led on that he was part of this group of senior bureaucrats and politicians and journalists that paddled a northern river every summer. The only rule, he said, being that the river had to flow into the Arctic Ocean. Ted Johnson, a respected lawyer, conservationist, and former senior aide to Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, was the ringleader, along with CTV News legend Craig Oliver and a cast of many others, including, on occasion, Pierre Trudeau himself. It was a real pleasure to sit down with Ted and hear his stories. So let's push off from shore, and away we go. Ted Johnson, welcome to the Explore podcast.
Thanks, David. It's wonderful to be here.
It's really wonderful to have you here. And I got the idea for this a couple of years ago. I think I ran into you at an RCGS event with Robert Fowler.
That's right, yeah.
And we all got talking about paddling Arctic rivers, of which I've done.
Favorite subject.
Yeah, which I've done a very little bit, but you guys have done a lot.
We were crazy.
Yeah.
Number two, several of us had very understanding wives who would let us get away for 2 weeks in the summer. And the great thing about my gang was everybody showed up. If you committed in February to go on a trip, you showed up in July or August, and no one ever reneged. And we were all very fortunate. We all loved the Arctic, northern Canada, and we had a rough idea of how to paddle. And then we just pieced it together from there. Around every spring, as we got into it, Peter Stollery and I were both working on Parliament Hill, him as an MP and then a senator, and I as a ministerial aide. We would go down to the parliamentary library. They had a fantastic big atlas of Canada there with wonderful maps. And we would say, what about that? We've done this area here. What about over here? And look at that blue line is fairly thick. Maybe there's something to it. So let's look into that. And that's how a trip would be born. And we'd pull a gang together and engage in our annual lunacy.
And it was a kind of a who's who in Ottawa, too. You had a mix of...
Craig Oliver was the core spark plug. He was CTV television news correspondent. Yeah. Tim Kotcheff was his boss and VP of news at CTV. He drew John Godfrey, who ultimately became an MP, but at that time was not, but was much consulted by governments in those days. And he happened to be at a press club, at the press club, and remembered the next morning that a guy named something Oliver had asked him if he wanted to go on a canoe trip. And did I know how to get in touch with him? Anyway, the group came together like that. And occasionally we had a former prime minister, several cabinet ministers who came along on trips.
Pierre Trudeau, very famously, was part of this.
Correct, yes, and a great paddler. A real pleasure to paddle with. And it was wonderful to be out there when he would let his hair down and chew the fat, as he liked to put it.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into that for sure. First of all, I think there hasn't, the summer really hasn't gone by where you haven't been up north, really.
There was a period there from 78 through to the mid-90s, where it was just about every year. We were able to cover a lot of ground. All of us very keen on. The first time we did a river that we didn't know much about, and it was in territory we knew nothing about, was the Hood.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't a first descent by any means. Others had done it.
Yeah.
But, boy, it was all new to us.
Yeah.
We're in the Barren Lands. We're way above the tree line.
Yeah.
We finish on the Arctic Ocean. And
That incredible falls there, too, isn't there?
We saw Wilberforce Falls,
Yeah.
one of the highest in Canada that nobody ever gets to see, much higher than Niagara, and quite spectacular. And rich in history, particularly the earlier Franklin expedition that came back up the Hood River, trying to escape from the Arctic coast and get back to Fort Enterprise and on Winter Lake. But that's a whole other story. Anyway, the Hood River had a bit of everything. And we happened to luck into a spectacular summer that summer of 1980.
1980. That's caribou territory. Did you see that?
The river was lined with a white line about a foot above the current water level when we paddled it in late July, early August. And we figured it out. It was all caribou hair.
Oh, amazing.
And what it was, the main migration of the Bathurst herd would cross the Hood River further up, and they would lose hair, and it would be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. The Bathurst herd at that time was 300,000 or 400,000.
Massive.
Peaked in 1992 at about 420,000. Today, it's fewer than 20,000. Yeah. And that's an entire other tragic story.
Yeah.
But in any case, river white with caribou hair. We would see them every once in a while on another river in that area, on the Coppermine, crossing Point Lake. We saw 10,000 caribou crossing nose to tail, swimming across a narrow part of the lake. And you'd see massive herd, grazing up in the hill far away. And then the first one would jump in the water, and then another would follow. Another would follow, and pretty soon you had a line astern right across the narrows in the lake, maybe a mile and a half, and then jumping out, shaking the water off, and continuing on. On one trip, we were camped where they came out of the lake and wandered right through our campsite. Couldn't have cared less about us. And literally thousands of them. We like to joke that we could walk on their backs right across the lake.
What was the sound of that?
It wasn't terribly noisy.
Yeah.
There was the sound of them swimming, but they're mostly below water. And the odd grunt when they get out of the water, and then the click of their hind legs as they would run across the barrens to find a grazing land. Might run a couple of 100 yards, and then they'd stop and you hear this click, click as they're running along. It's a tendon in their hind leg that does that.
What a privilege to
it was to see that up close and to see it several times in almost the same place.
Yeah.
To me was a real highlight.
And as you say, a lot of those herds now are really dropping. Dramatically.
Kaminiak along the coast of Hudson Bay has gone to zero.
Wow.
And from 100 and some odd thousand. Only the blue nose over by the Yukon seems to be doing better.
Is it?
Yeah, their numbers are holding up. But the barren ground caribou are no more.
It's sad, obviously, but in some ways the beauty of your trips is you were catching the Arctic in a last period, pre-climate change, really.
That's right.
Thundering on it.
We would regularly find little hummocks of ice on a north slope down near the river where we could stop in, get the ice for the drinks for that night and continue on. Today, that doesn't happen. I've been back and you don't see that.
Where did this love of canoeing come from? Like, when did this kick in? Because there's a strong gene there, obviously.
I wonder if it is in the genes, because my grandfather was a civil engineer and surveyor in Ontario and worked for what became the Department of Lands and Forests as a surveyor in the summer. He explored the area around Temagami, surveyed townships around Temagami, cutting straight lines through the bush. Yeah. Surveyed lines through the bush. And in part of the colonization efforts of the government of Ontario in the late 1890s through to the early 1920s. Yeah. And he would be gone for the summer with a party of Indigenous helpers and a couple of other surveyors. And I think inspired me. He didn't live long enough for me to meet him, but stories passed on by my mom about him, his love of the Indigenous people that he worked with, and his love of the country. And I think that may be where it started. And then when I was a kid, my brother and I at the cottage, the summer cottage, organized with a couple of girls at neighboring cottages an exploration company, and we were going to explore our lake.
Nice.
And we produced maps, which we sold to some very generous cottagers. They were 50 cents each. Maps of our hand-drawn maps of the lake that they already knew everything all about.
Nice. Where is this lake?
Mary Lake in North Muskoka.
Oh, okay.
Port Sydney, which is about 10 miles south of Huntsville. In the mid-70s, I was living in Ottawa and picked up with a few friends who were part of a group called the Ottawa River Runners. Several of them had worked on the Wild Rivers Survey for the Government of Canada. Back in the early Trudeau governments, Pierre Trudeau governments, Parks Canada sponsored surveys of Canada's wild rivers. And a number of the guys who did those, and Pretu Duran, Tommy Kovacs, later a friend I discovered later, David Hogue, and a few others had all been part of that.
What a great gig. My
and
God.
They talked, and everything they told us about canoeing and wild rivers in the north was inspirational. So I went out with a few of them in the spring, starting in the mid to late 70s. We would canoe rivers around Ottawa during the flood, the spring freshet. And
there's great rivers around here even. Ottawa's
absolutely,
so blessed.
We're so fortunate around Ottawa. So we did things like the Opiongo and the Madawaska that would flood beautifully in the springtime and provide wonderful white water. There'd be barren rock gardens by July, but in May, raging torrents, and they were fun. And we were self-taught. We learned whitewater paddling. It was handed down from some of the guys from the Wild River Survey, and they taught us, the rest of us, a few of the tricks. And then we started paying attention to Bill Mason, who was talking about, again, we were so fortunate. He was in the Gatineau Hills just north of Ottawa, so we saw a fair bit of him. And ultimately, his movies his videos on the canoe and whitewater and tactics and how to canoe whitewater.
And he was literally it. There was no one else.
No,
really
that's
doing
right.
This stuff,
That's right.
Yeah.
He was a real guru. Really led the way.
We were talking before. You mentioned the first Arctic trip really for you was the Coppermine.
Coppermine, yeah. I got to know this young guy who was putting together an outfitting operation and selling canoeing equipment. The friends put me onto him. I wanted to get a whitewater paddle with a nice wide blade.
Yeah.
This was in the mid-70s. And they sent me to this guy, Wally Shaber.
Yeah, he's been on the podcast. We've had him on.
And you've had him on the podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, terrific. What a story.
Yeah.
So in those days, I remember we went upstairs in his mother's house to a bedroom closet where he had his paddles for sale. And I bought my first paddle, whitewater paddle from Wally, and it covered it in his mom's house in Centertown in Ottawa. And so Wally then organized an outfitting company called Black Feather. He named the company Black Feather, and it became a legend in canoeing and
really groundbreaking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so his first Arctic trip was the Coppermine. He'd done the Nahanni maybe once or twice before taking on the Coppermine in 1978. And his chief guide was a guy named Jim Raffin.
Yeah, who's another canoe evangelist.
Evangelist and guru. And a big factor in the Canadian Canoe Museum in Peterborough. And Mike Biddell, who was a great outdoorsman, canoeist, guitarist, and really fun on a trip.
And another neighbor of mine up in Chelsea. So
of course. So off we went on with, I think there were 18 of us in two little groups on the Coppermine. And we took 3 weeks, and it was an eye-opener for all of us. The thing about the Coppermine is you start on the tree line at Obstruction Falls on Point Lake. Not many trees there. And then you get back in behind the tree line as you get further down past Point Lake. And by the way, it was Point Lake I was speaking about earlier with all the caribou. And then it's a forested valley. But you go up to the top of the hills and look around, and you had barren lands for 50 miles in all directions. And the Coppermine River itself created a microclimate, which allowed these trees to grow well above the Arctic Circle and almost to the Arctic Ocean. They peter out about 75, 50 miles south of the Arctic Ocean and the mouth of the river. And so that was a spectacular trip. We started at Obstruction Falls. We saw the caribou, and we, at the end, came to Bloody Falls and camped at Bloody Falls, the site of the Hearns story of 1774 of the massacre of a couple of families of Inuit by the guides. And
guides,
by Hearns guides and so on. And it was pristine and untouched when we were there. I went back to the Coppermine in last year, so on a family trip with my niece and a couple of other families and her family. And unfortunately, an ATV route has been opened up from the village of Kugluktuk directly to Bloody Falls. And now it's cigarette wrappers and beer cans, and it's too bad. But it's up till there. The Coppermine did not disappoint. It was its old wild self for hundreds of miles.
It's a pretty technical river too, isn't it?
Yeah, it has a bit of everything. Not much in the way of portages, a bit of lining here and there, but it's almost all runnable. But you gotta be in '78. We're in street clothes with light rain pants and a life jacket.
Yeah, there was no industry to outfit you
nothing
at that
to
point.
It. So we pick our way down the shore, just a meter offshore, back paddling, ferrying, staying as close to shore as we could. Often in a whitewater river, that there's fairly gentle water when you get in right close to shore. But this time, last year, same thing, same river, same rapids, Sandstone Rapids, Muskox Rapids, Escape Rapids, all tremendously exciting. Franklin's map from 1822 says many dangerous rapids, and he was absolutely right.
It's still true.
And now, though, we're wearing helmets, we've got dry suits, life jackets, spray skirts on the canoes, and they've taken all the sport out of it. And we would just motor down the middle, although my marvelous stern man on the Coppermine, Ken McDermott, who now owns Blackfeather, he kept us out of trouble, and we had to dance around a number of very treacherous-looking rocks and could have created big trouble. Anyway, you can do much more aggressive whitewater canoeing with the evolution of equipment to where it is today.
Oh yeah, no kidding, Kevlar.
We went through. I remember we paddled the Rocky Defile, which is people have died in the Rocky Defile on the Coppermine, and it's an S-shaped canyon with no takeout. And once you're in it, you're committed. And a lot of back waves thrown off the canyon walls, causing big trouble. And we, in '78, our canoes were probably at least a third full of water by the time we finished the defile. It's maybe a mile long. Last year, I don't think there was a teacup of water in our canoe because of the spray skirts. And probably because Ken in the back kept us out of trouble. He's a lot better than I am.
And I think so that for you and Wally have had a long history together.
Yes,
really
we have, and we did he came on. He was with us and very helpfully with us on a couple of our trips. Particularly when Pierre Trudeau, who knew Wally well and enjoyed his company, was along on the trips, and Wally would be along, and it kept us all out of trouble. And great company around the campfire in the evening.
Yeah, and just the steadying force, isn't he? He's very calm and very...
he is rock solid. And at one point, Mr. Trudeau got drawn out by a current this was on the Petawawa River. We were doing a tame trip, but above Crooked Chute, which is a dangerous rapid. And Pierre got caught in a bit of a current that pushed him out from shore. And he didn't know nobody had briefed him what was around the corner. And so there's Wally. Wally was up close to him because they were in the canoe together. And Wally just very calmly signaled to Pierre, okay, swim back towards shore. Pierre, by the way, is then mid-70s.
Oh, wow. So this was his last trip, really?
It was his last trip, yeah. To my knowledge, Justin would know better. But I think that was his last whitewater trip in any case. But anyway, and the Prime Minister was saved by the very cool and collected Wally Shaber.
So let's talk about Pierre, if you don't mind, Pierre Trudeau.
Yeah, by all means.
Because you were his executive assistant, I think.
I was, yeah.
Yeah, from 1980 to...
80 to 84.
Yeah. So
I had the best mandate, I like to think. It was when we patriated the Constitution.
Yeah,
Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It was a great time to be involved with him in government.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, that sort of philosopher aspect of him, this is really where it...
Yeah, the constitutional lawyer, civil libertarian, civil liberties lawyer.
Yeah.
All came together.
I saw all that.
And one last shot at it after the failure of the Victoria Charter in 1970.
Yeah.
And torpedoed by the Quebec Bourassa government. This was a last crack.
Yeah.
And it worked.
So I would love to talk to you a bit on that, but that might be another podcast.
Sure, that's another.
But it would be amazing.
It was a great pleasure and a powerful canoeist. Paddler, I meant to say.
Yeah.
And we alternated on the biggest river we did was the Sikine. He and I would alternate bow and stern.
That's the Yukon heading into the Pacific?
It's in British Columbia.
It's in British Columbia.
Heading into the Pacific through the Alaska Panhandle. But the upper stretches of that, the upper 150 miles or so, are spectacularly beautiful. You're paddling around under the Spetzizi Plateau, seriously wild British Columbia, magical British Columbia country.
Beautiful.
And mountain goat, or red goat country.
Yeah, looking down at you as you go by.
Yeah.
So what was he like as a paddler, as a companion on the river?
Periods of quiet. He was a very reflective guy and quite happy in his own skin, so he could paddle for an hour without talking about anything. And then we'd chat, get on to some subject or another, 90% of it unrelated to politics.
Yeah.
And he told me about his canoe trip up from Montreal to James Bay in 1940. 3 of them setting out and spending the summer exploring, basically.
Yeah.
But good value, great fun around the campfire, always insisting on doing his share of the work.
Yeah.
Just as the former Prime Minister, we're not going to make him wash dishes when his name comes up. We used to do it in alphabetical order. And when T comes up, somebody would step. Oh, no, he would insist, and he was good. And when the dishes came back, they were the cleanest any of us had ever seen them. They were cleaner than before the trip. And he was just so conscientious. I remember him folding our tent a couple of times. And he would, when it was finished, it looked like a brand new tent. Creases perfectly, everything perfectly aligned. It was, and none of us, the rest of us didn't have that same degree of concentration.
Good company pulled his weight. That's kind of what you want,
very
right?
much. So we did a book on our tripping. Bob Fowler edited and got us all to write chapters and so on and contribute our pictures. And he did a spectacular job of pulling together. And he was a part of the group and paddled on several of the northern trips. Pulled together this terrific book, and we debated what to call it. And we finally settled on the title, Sing Louder, Paddle Harder. And if you look into the book, it's privately published. There's a spot where somebody asked Pierre Trudeau on one of our Arctic trips. So the water here is about 35 degrees Fahrenheit. It's barely above freezing. You last maybe 5 minutes in it, and you're paddling across a lake. And what happens when you hear the canoe behind you has gone over, and they're floundering in the water and screaming for help, and you're in the middle of a lake and you're 5 miles from shore? What do you do? And he said, sing louder, paddle harder. We were never put to the test.
Man with a sense of humor.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So were all his trips with you were all post-office, when he was out of office? Were they?
Yes, they were. He himself had done trips when he was justice minister. But then once he was in office and he had his boys, he was going to go on a Hood River trip in 1980. He had just been reelected in February, and he had said back in the fall that he was keen to go. But then he hadn't been counting on being reelected as Prime Minister. And he said, sorry. In the spring, he said, I'm sorry, I won't be able to do it.
So I remember reading or coming across a story, and you may have even written it, about the two of you being in planes and flying in territory over Canada and looking down at rivers and spotting whitewater and discussing how you...
Particularly, I remember it vividly, both in Arctic Canada, but also in Norway. We were following a narrow canyon with a river in it, in a helicopter. We were on a NATO visit to Norway in a NATO helicopter. And so we began to speculate, where would you take it? On the left here? Yeah, you can go down the right there, see that black water. And that was part of the sport, was to figure out where you would do it from the air. Often, as I discovered the hard way later on, scouting from the air is not all that effective. Waves look much smaller than they are in the real world when you get down to lake level or river level.
Yeah, you're a pilot too. So
I am.
Flown over many a river, I'm sure.
Yes, over the years.
When you paddled with him, were you paddling partners?
Yeah, occasionally on the Stikine and on one of the Petawawa trips.
Yeah. Any close calls on any of those trips? Or
the Stikine, there's a canyon on the Stikine, a beautiful canyon called Beggarly Canyon. But it can be very wicked. You've got to nail the line just right. You come in a sweeping left turn. And if you're too high or too low, you're either going to be hurled up against the right wall of the canyon, or you're going to get spun out by a vicious back eddy, as happened to my pals Craig and Tim And Craig was a little bit hard of sight, had difficulty with sight, with glaucoma, and Tim was a little bit hard of hearing. Tim was in the bow, and you could hear Tim yelling at Craig to turn the canoe, and Craig didn't realize what was happening, and they just went straight. The canoe for days afterwards had a big dent in the bow. They were just straight into the wall of the canoe. I can still remember them howling away and cursing at each other, blaming the other. And I was behind them with Pierre, and I was in the stern. It was my day in the stern. And we started down toward the canyon, and I saw we are not going to make it. We're a little too high. And so I eddied out, pulled us into shore. I said, I'm sorry, Pierre, we're going to walk across this. What I didn't tell him was that I was determined not to go down in history as the guy who drowned, the former aide who drowned Pierre Trudeau in a rapid in northern British Columbia.
Don't want that to be the lead line in your obit eventually,
exactly.
Right? Oh, my God. But you survived.
A couple of our other canoes did it pretty skillfully.
Yeah.
Made it through with some excitement, but made it.
Yeah.
But I was very pleased to come out the other side at the end of the portage and be in one piece.
What amazes me, too, you were doing these trips in a time when this is all pre-internet. Organizing all this stuff's a lot more work.
Right, and pre-satellite radio. On the early trips, we were out on the Coppermine, on the Hood for 2 or 3 weeks, depending on the trip, and with no radio. But reassuringly, my pal Tim Kotcheff said, not to worry, guys, I've got my book. And his book was Wilderness Surgery, how to perform an appendectomy when using a paring knife when one of your canoe mates has an appendix attack. There was zero way of contacting. Then I started bringing I have a float plane, and I started bringing the emergency locator transmitter from the float plane, carefully taped in the off position, but ready if we ever needed it to pop the beeper and get rescue. And then we discovered the marvelous, and this was particularly when we were canoeing in the high Arctic, in the Arctic islands, the Spilsbury SBX-11 single sideband shortwave radio.
Oh, wow, shortwave.
Boy, was it ever terrific. And we would suspend the antenna, this copper wire, about, almost 100 meters long. We would suspend it between 2 paddles. And when you wanted to communicate with the outside world, I would plug in the antenna at the center of the antenna into the back of the radio and plug in the batteries, get her up and running, and 2 guys would hold the paddles tight so the antenna stayed above the ground, and we would call out. It was fantastic. It was the high Arctic telephone. There was a base in Resolute, and it would be in touch with all the scientific camps, so on, that are taking place as part of the Polar Continental Shelf Project, which was an early attempt in the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s to assert Canadian sovereignty over the high Arctic. And scientists would be going out, managed by the Polar Continental Shelf Project, which would have planes available, which they could pay for and rent. The scientists would rent. So we tapped into that network. We had paid for our own planes, but we did ask if we could use 26 Resolute as our base. And so every morning and every night, 7 o'clock, they would contact every camp. And it would be Weather Creek and all these beautiful names, Devon Island, and so on, from all over the Arctic, geological and ice survey camps. And then it would be Rowley River Canoe Party, and Thompson River Canoe Party. And that would be us. And if you didn't report back, answer the call 2 times in a row, 2 calls, they would send a rescue plane out, a search plane out to see what was wrong. So you had to be very assiduous about showing up on schedule. But it was wonderful. So then we felt much safer, and we were able to push it further north and do a number of first descents, particularly in the Arctic islands.
So tell us about some of those. Where were we?
The Thompson River on Banks Island.
So that's far western Arctic.
Yeah, it's in the western Arctic. Yeah. And we go out across the Beaufort Sea from Inuvik. We went out in a float plane, and they stationed, it was Ptarmigan Airways stationed a float plane in Inuvik to take us for the trip. Twin Otter on floats. We refueled at the south end of Banks Island, and several of the local fellows came down to watch the refueling going on. And we got chatting and told them what we were doing. We're going up to the Thompson River further up the island, which, as far as we've been able to establish, no one had ever paddled. And they said, one of them, I remember saying, "You fellas got dogs?" We looked at each other and we said, no. There were 8 of us on the trip. We looked at each other and said, no, we don't have dogs. He said, you guys going to die up there. And so that set the trip off on a good footing. Anyway, on we went, found the river. Our pilot was terrific. Never been in that area before. We were forced down by a cloud. We were flying about 50 feet off the deck. It's a relatively flat island, relatively.
Yeah.
But the Thompson River Valley became quite apparent to us, and we went. We had a great debate after we'd landed and the plane had left as to which way was north, because in that part of the world, the magnetic North Pole was southeast of us, about 300 miles southeast of us.
Right.
It was said, the compass was said to be unreliable. So we had a huge debate because the river was slack at that point where the plane had let us off. And the group split 4-4 as to which way was north and which way was downstream. And if we went the wrong way, we'd waste a day trying to realize, oh no, we got to go the other way. Anyway, we figured it out finally.
Yeah.
One of our members snuck into his tent and broke the tie by using his compass and realizing that the north was, he got North Magnetic Pole, and he figured if it was there at about 165 degrees magnetic, then north is up that way. Zero magnetic.
He was
zero,
right.
Zero magnetic would be true north, and then we headed off. Then we knew which way was down the river, and off we went.
Yeah.
We saw more muskox than you ever imagined.
Oh, my goodness.
Massive herds of 25 and 30 muskox, and that in itself is a wonderful different story.
So I've had a number of people on this who've had encounters with muskox and say that they are the most terrifying animal in the Arctic.
We didn't find them terrifying, but they can be. Their bark is were worse than their bite because the inside all that shaggy fur. It's not a buffalo. This is not a bison.
Yeah,
it's a goat, and with a
really big,
with a lot of
coat.
hair, and terrific antlers and a thick head. We saw a lot of them. They had been decimated sometime in the late 1800s, but probably because of the metal that was left on the Investigator, the Franklin search ship that was abandoned in Mercy Bay on the north end of Banks Island, we finished our trip right close to there and then had the pilot fly us over the bay. What we didn't realize is the expedition about 10 years ago, Stephen Harper instructed, went there in Parks Canada and found the ship about 10 or 15 feet below the surface.
Huh.
At least the masts were there. But it well anchored, still tied to shore. But we did see the coal pile that they'd left on shore because they'd taken a lot of coal off in case the ship got nipped in the ice, sank. They'd still have some sort of source of heat. Anyway, we finished right near the site of the Investigator rather, and near Mercy Bay at the mouth of the Thompson River. Some years later, 2 or 3 years later, some of the fellows at Parks Canada got wind of the fact that we had done the Thompson, and they said, we're thinking of maybe making a park up there. Can you come in and talk to us?
Yeah.
And so this would have been in the mid-'80s. And so we did. We went in and told them the story of our trip, showed some pictures and so on. And a couple of years later, out came a proposal for a national park reserve, phase 1 of making a park, and now it's a national park.
Oh, amazing. Nice to have a little part of that.
Yeah, we played a very small role in the whole thing. And
they're lovely.
That was very special.
So I just want to know, what's that terrain look like when you're going through it?
It's a wide valley, beautiful wide valley. How do I describe it? And which winds and meanders the river in gentle S-turns.
So it's like low hills around it.
Yeah, low hills.
Yeah.
There's a gentle current, no rapids. We didn't know if we were going to encounter. We knew we were going to drop about 50 feet. We didn't know if it was all at once or in stages with ledges or not at all. And it was just a gentle glide all the way down the river. Now, we were paddling in snowstorms occasionally in early August, just about every night when we would camp on a beach along the shore, climb up the bank 20 or 30 feet up above, and there would be a food cache, an Inuit food cache, probably several hundred years old, and with no food, of course, in it, just a muskox skull, very weathered muskox skull, moss-covered, could have been hundreds, if not 1,000 years old. And
things preserve up there.
And perfectly preserved.
Yeah.
But to keep the wolves and foxes from getting at the muskox after they'd killed one, they would put them in these piles of flagstones, forming a bit of a refrigerator, a recess in the center, and maybe a cubic foot or so.
Fascinating.
And and larger than that if they had a muskox skull in it. But anyway, we found quite a number of those along the way, and evidence of people who'd been there for probably thousands of years.
So the Inuit who were warning you needed dogs, I mean, are there polar bears up there? Or what was
Polar bears and Arctic foxes, a lot of Arctic wolves. We never had a ugly encounter with muskox. We did see them butting heads occasionally, and the dust flying off. We actually, on one river, on the Burnside in the Barren Lands, we eddied in to shore and saw an old bull muskox standing, just grazing right near the river, and wondered how close we could get. Several of the guys got right up. They could have reached out and touched him.
So you've talked about first descents, and it sounds like you've done so many. What are other ones that are really memorable for you?
We think we did 5 or 6 first descents, rivers that the Inuit would never have paddled. You don't descend a river in a kayak, and kayaks were mainly for hunting seal offshore. And the Twin Otter made a lot of these rivers accessible. It made no economic sense whatsoever to try to take a single canoe in and a single otter on wheels, because most of the travel to these rivers has to be on wheels. And so we think it's not entirely arrogant on our part to believe. And there is no written record. We could find none, and we asked among the canoeing cognoscenti, including the authors of the book Canoeing North into the Unknown, from 1874 to the mid-1970s, and nobody had heard of anyone paddling some of these rivers. The one that is dear to my heart is the Roley River on Baffin Island, northwest Baffin Island. Empties into the Fox Basin, named after Graham Roley, who became a very dear, he and his wife Diana became very close friends. He went in 1936 as an archaeologist studying out of Cambridge University, wanting to do an archaeological dig up in the area around Igloolik. But Igloolik wasn't a community at that time. He was on the Melville Peninsula, near the top of the Melville Peninsula. So almost the most northerly finger. It's above the left side of Hudson Bay, pointing toward Baffin Island. And so he got there too late to dig. So rather than getting on the Hudson Bay supply boat and going back to Cambridge for the winter, he said, no, I'd like to stay on the land here. The local Hudson Bay factor, about 50 miles south of there at Repulse Bay, said, well, of course you'll come and stay with my wife and me. And he said, actually, thank you. I'd like to go out and live on the land and see if I can connect with the Inuit.
Wow.
And which he did. In the midst of winter, he had heard about a trade route across Baffin Island where they would go from the Melville Peninsula across to a bay where there were 2 high hills and a river falling in between the 2 high hills. And if you followed that river, it would lead you up, particularly in winter when it was frozen, would lead you up across Baffin Island, and you could go across and tumble down steep cliffs down into Baffin Bay and ultimately go along the coast there and meet up with the whale hunting people. The walrus hunting people of Fox Basin could then connect with the whale hunting people of Baffin Bay. So he wanted to prove whether or not this was a true story. And he read of it in the writings of a previous archaeologist from 70 or 80 years earlier named Boaz. So he offered some cigarettes and a gun, and no doubt other things, to one of the Inuit in the area and his son, if they would accompany him and they could go by dog sled and see if they could find this mythical route in the winter.
Wow.
Off they went. And as the days were getting longer, late February, early March, they set out across the Fox Basin and across what was to become Raleigh Island, be named after him, the last piece of Canada to be mapped by somebody actually going there, mapping it terrestrially rather than from an airplane, which is what happened after the war.
Yeah.
But Fox Basin was the last place to get filled in on the map because it's so hard to distinguish land from ice. And off they went up the river, and it was all tickety-boo according to plan. The only problem was they started running out of food.
Oh.
And they saw no caribou for several days. Things were getting pretty desperate. They had their dogs they had to feed, and if they were to complete the trip. And they were at the point where they were about to boil their belts and their shoes. And the father saw a caribou and shot it.
Oh, wow.
And saved the day, and on they went. But they were on the edge of starvation, and then they struggled on. Graham, all the while, kept a map with a piece of paper from the Hudson Bay Post mapping in pencil their progress every day, estimating how far they'd come there and the shape of the shoreline around. He just used his compass to, no fancy Yodelite or anything, and just with his compass and so on, figured it out. Some years later, 90s, I was visiting him, and he showed me his early map, the one he'd done by pencil, and we laid it down, compared it with a modern map from aerial surveys, and it's amazingly accurate. His handwritten map from in the winter, February and March, with a pencil on paper. And so I like to attribute to him, it's a straight line from Jacques Cartier and maybe John Cabot to Graham Raleigh, explorers and map makers who made their maps from actually being there
on the ground
and drawing it, and with many great names in between.
Amazing. So did you know him before you did the river then?
Yes, we did. Yeah. And by the way, he told us he had insisted that they not name it after him, but the toponymy people thought they would and decided to, and he was very deserving of that. Anyway, he completed it and got over into Baffin Bay, went by along the ice into Pond Inlet. Yeah. And it was a successful trip. So we were going to paddle Graham's River. Yeah. And so off we went out of Hall Beach, there's an Inuit community.
Did you get parting words of advice from him?
No, I had some parting words when we came back. But
okay, we'll get to this.
What it was going to be like to paddle it. We had dinner with him and Diana and talked about it, looked at the maps, talked about the Arctic generally, and it was wonderful. It was always, the two of them, they were always full of interesting stories, and they were great company. We had a hard time getting in. It took 2 flights before we could finally find a place to land, and the weather cleared it up enough for us to get in there. Yeah. But we found a spot.
Landing on water or landing?
No, on land. We're on land. Yeah. And there was a little short, after looking all over, Carlsberg, who was our pilot from Bradley First Air, noticed it. I was up in the cockpit with him. He said, "What about that over there?" And he went in for a look, and he said, "Okay, let's give it a try." And he put her down. The main wheels touched just on the edge of a drop, a bit of a cliff, maybe a sandbank, maybe 5 or 10 feet high. He hit just inside the edge of the bank, reversed the throttles and the propellers quickly, and stopped, and he was okay. We got out with all our stuff. He came back with a second flight, and he said, "Ted, would you put this little piece of pink cloth down to mark where I touched down the last time with my left wheel? And I want to try to touch down there to ensure I use the whole runway, because it's pretty short here." And I still have the piece of cloth with the tire print of the plane from when he touched down on it the second time round.
That's a pilot. Wow.
An outstanding Twin Otter pilot.
Wow.
So off we go down the river. We ran into trouble right away with big rapids, many portages. It was relatively slow going, but spectacular. Along the way, we came to a lake that Graham had named the Heart-Shaped Lake. And on every promontory, with these sandy and clay banks around the lake, every promontory, there was an Inukshuk. And here and there, every point. And it took us a while. And then down at the base of the lake, I should say, the river flows out there immediately into a roaring waterfall. You can hear it from the lake. And so right by where the last takeout before the waterfall, there were these flagstones lying around, big ones. They were out of place, and maybe 3 feet across, a meter across, some of them. And we figured out what this was all about. It was caribou hunting ground. And what they would do is the Inuit hunters would push the caribou. If they ran into a small herd, they would herd them onto the lake ice, down the lake. Caribou would see, they're very short-sighted, so couldn't tell between a man and an Inukshuk. And they would see an Inukshuk, or there's a man on every point. Yeah. So they got to stay on the lake. And they get down, and then they hear this waterfall. And the obvious thing is if you're thinking caribou, is you got to go up over that high hill and escape around from this fall and escape from these hunters. And right just where they would logically have made that decision, these flagstones would have been on their sides, forming a perfect shield, probably covered in caribou fur, and possibly looking a little bit like an animal. And behind it, Inuit hunters with spears and bows and arrows. And they would leap out when they had the herd there and the slaughter would begin, and they would get as much as they could to eat.
Amazing.
And the rest would escape. So we got to that same spot, and we had arranged for a helicopter to come in because Graham and his daughter, Susan, were doing some archaeology the year that we were doing the river, the Rolly River. He had never seen Diana Falls, or the falls. We wanted to name it Diana Falls.
Yeah.
We never quite succeeded. But this monster waterfall where he had to turn back on his dog sled and do a long way around and up and over the hill and so on. We were not going to carry all our stuff up over this monster 700 vertical foot hill if we could avoid it. And we put two and two together. This is well before the trip, because we could see on the map from the topography. It was obvious there's a big hill there.
Yeah.
And that's the only way we're going to get up and over. So why don't we get a helicopter to bring Graham and Susan over from their archaeology camp near Igloolik, and we'll show them Diana Falls, the waterfall that he never saw. And then the helicopter can sling us and our gear up and over the mountain. We can avoid this pig of a portage, which would otherwise take 3 days, and a lot of climbing. And so it was all set up. We had the helicopter that I delivered a sling to Viking Helicopters a month before the trip. Everything was in place. The helicopter was operating out of Igloolik, servicing the various scientific groups, and off we went. So we were in touch on day one. We camped partway up the hill, and in touch with the helicopter pilot, and on the SBX-11 radio that I was talking about.
Yeah.
Called him, and she said, the helicopter pilot said, "I'm weathered in here at Steensby Inlet. We've come all the way from Igloolik. I've got your two friends, but we can't, I'm a single engine helicopter, and I'm not going to go across Steensby Inlet, 12 miles wide, in this low cloud and fog." And I said, "Oh, it's too bad because the weather in here is flyable." And she said, "We'll turn around and I'll call you back. We'll probably try again tomorrow." And so next morning they did. They tried again and went back to Steensby Inlet, landed, and I guess they had lunch or something at Steensby, and then took off. Shortly after they took off, on their way now to come to join us, I hear on the radio, we had just talked to her and said we should be there in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And I hear her calling 26 Resolute. 26 Resolute, this is MHI. I've had an engine out. And my pal Stollery and I are in the radio tent, my tent. And I looked at him. I said, "They only got one engine. And an engine out means they're going down." And nothing. We heard nothing on the radio. And finally, after about 20 or 25 minutes, she called out. She said, 26 Resolute, it's MHI. And she listed the damage. The main rotor was broken. Yeah. She tried to land in a pond just up ahead and ran out of momentum and didn't quite make it. Landed on the rocks, did a skillful job in preventing it from nosing over full of gas.
Yeah.
And bits of the main rotor actually flew into the cockpit, but nobody was hurt. Tail rotor was broken. And we heard her rhyme off this catalog. And long story short, Graham and Susan sadly never got to get to see the falls that we want to name after his wife. And we, equally importantly to us, are left to go to do this pig of a portage, which we then spent another couple of days doing and finished the river. And it was a beautiful river.
Yeah. How long was that?
The length we paddled, probably 110 miles.
Yeah. Okay. That's good.
So from the center of Baffin Highland. And so that was one of the first descents. Another great one, I feel like, was the Ruggles on Ellesmere Island, which we think is the most northerly river in the world that's canoeable. There are other rivers, but none of them appear from the topographical maps to be paddleable.
So people can picture Ellesmere as the very top of
we're at the top of the map of Canada.
Up by Greenland.
Yeah, we're at 82 degrees north.
Yeah.
So we're 8 degrees from the North Pole.
That's right at the top of the island too, isn't
Pretty
it?
well, yeah.
So
we landed at Lake Hazen, and
so Alert's just a little further north there, probably.
So Alert is probably another 50 miles
at the
further
Canadian
north,
Forces Base.
up on the Arctic coast.
Yeah.
And it was...
So who's on this trip?
There were 8 of us on this trip. John Godfrey, Eddie Goldenberg, Tim Kotcheff, Craig Oliver, Peter Stollery, Ross Howard, Bill Fox,
Oh, Bill Hawks.
Yeah, a
he's
wonderful,
the Morny.
wonderful friend.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out. So we broke out of cloud on a 4-hour flight by Twin Otter on wheels north
From where?
from Resolute,
Okay.
which is the central transportation base
Yeah.
in the high Arctic. And we break out of the cloud. I'm up in the cockpit, wedged in the door,
Yeah.
talking with the pilots, the pilot and co-pilot, and watching because I knew we're getting pretty close to the river.
Yeah.
And Lake Hazen. We break out of the cloud at about 500 feet, and it's white. The lake is absolutely white. 50 miles of ice, 10 miles wide, 50 miles long, a little ribbon of water around the shore. And I can hear the recriminations from the back.
Yeah.
They're already ready to lynch me because it was Peter and I who'd been the navigation committee, put the trip together. And which took 2 years, by the way, to move canoes into place and have all the
Pre-position and everything.
pre-position ready to when we got there. And anyway, I turned around to the guys. I said, it was blue on the map. And later, we encountered two Inuit a fellow and a young woman, a young Inuit who were in park wardens. Parks Canada had created a park in that area. And it's a hiking park where you can hike through the top of Ellesmere Island from Hazen Camp to Tanqueray Fjord. And chatting with them, and I told him, we were surprised about this, about how much ice there is on the lake. Oh, he said, the fella said, 7 feet of ice out there. He said, you guys should have talked to us before you come up here. Last time Lake Hazen melted was 1963. So
you're not sharing that information with the rest of the group.
I did not tell her, not till the trip was over. And so anyway, we ended up hauling our canoes like oxen. We'd take the bow line, the painter, wrap it around a paddle, and one on each end of the paddle.
Oh my God!
Pull the fully loaded canoe across
I'm picturing the
ice.
Franklin expedition here. Right?
It was that all over again, the Franklin Death March.
Yeah.
And it took all day, but we were so fortunate because we had spectacular weather. It was sunny,
good.
Not a cloud, all day. We watched the sun circle above us the entire day, dip toward the horizon in the evening, and then as by 1 o'clock in the morning, it was rising again, and it never went below the horizon.
Yeah.
And got across to the other side, to the top of the Ruggles River, where there is, we discovered later, with reading some Parks Canada historic stuff, that the tent ring that we found of an Inuit tent, and we were always, because Parks Canada are very sensitive about this, please don't touch the tent rings. Yeah. And we didn't touch the tent rings, because you never know how old they are. I would have said maybe that was 100 years old. In fact, it's 1,000 years old.
Amazing.
And they've pieced together quite a story involving those tent rings and a young couple, a newly married young couple, and a cousin of the wife, all of them ultimately starving and dying up there because the husband got injured or sick.
Yeah.
And so it's a tragic story, but in this
so that's based on archeology and
yes, exactly.
Incredible.
They pieced all that together.
Yeah.
But, and so how sad, this fellow brings his young wife to this spectacular site. We counted 84 glaciers sparkling in the sun all the way around the lake.
Gorgeous.
And it was, in perfect sunlight, was spectacular. Anyway, we paddled the Ruggles River. We had feared two things. Number one, is it going to drop all in one place over a waterfall? So we're very careful going around each corner, each turn, to scout ahead to make sure we knew what was up ahead as far as we could see. And the other thing was something called off ice, where the ice and snow accumulate and the river flows, and this happens all over the Arctic, the high Arctic. The river flows underneath, and it's a death trap. Because if you're in a canoe and you go under off ice, you're in a tunnel that's going to get shallower, and the roof is going to come down until it's just water and you don't breathe anymore. Yeah. And there's a current. Yeah. That off ice was a big concern. But we didn't find any. We made it all the way to the Kennedy Channel and Nares Strait, and we encountered no off ice, but we did encounter very difficult ice conditions at the mouth of the Ruggles River.
Yeah.
And to attempt, and the wind was coming up, and to attempt to paddle. Yeah. You're at the very top of the world here.
Yeah.
To attempt to paddle that. So after some discussion, we thought the wiser thing was to abandon at that point.
Yeah.
We wanted to go to Fort Conger. which was about 40 miles. Our goal was to finish the trip at Fort Conger.
Yeah, what is Fort Conger?
That's where first American expedition, the Greely expedition in 1883
which
or
didn't
so,
end well, that one.
and set up a camp, and they were something like 70 guys.
Yeah.
And they had a coal seam there. They thought that would keep them warm, and they built a shelter, which was like a modern house, very airy, high ceiling, everything wrong. And so 9 guys survived by the end of it. And it was a terrible story. And it's worth a podcast in and of itself. And then later in 1910 or 11, it became Cook's and then Perry's starting off spot for their quest for the North Pole. And Perry had left, his shelter is still there. And he and Hansen, his number 2, each had a little cabin, which was not much bigger than them, which was much wiser. They were able to stay warm, and when they were sheltering before they set off on their trip. Anyway, so we got the helicopter in, called 26 Resolute. The helicopter we knew was operating in the area on a project for the Department of National Defense. They came and lifted us out and took us back to Lake Hazen. And then the Twin Otter that was due 2 or 3 days later, we were in touch with them on the radio, and they dropped in, picked us up at Lake Hazen, and instead of turning immediately and going south, they took us on up to Fort Conger so that we could explore that very interesting historic.
And there's
all kinds of detritus from the Greely expedition.
Oh my goodness.
Including a big ship's propeller, a big brass ship's propeller sitting there. Greely got that far because the water was unusually open all the way up the Nares Strait. And the following year, it didn't open that much. So that was, a lot of the guys died heading south, trying to get further south on Ellesmere Island to a pickup place where there was open water. Anyway, that
incredible.
was a sad story. But paddling the Ruggles River, coming into new country that, of course, the Inuit have been there for 1,000 years. But white guys in canoes, this is new territory. And boy, was it ever special.
It's amazing the history you find, too.
Yes, and then you stumble on these things like the tent ring. But we like to say when we finished the trip and we were in Fort Conger, looking at the site of Fort Conger, looking southeast toward the northwest coast of Greenland.
Yeah. That's incredible.
That was at the end of a canoe trip, so we were kind of proud of that.
We have a number of mutual friends who I've been tapping before this interview began, and one of them is Wally Shaber, who's come up on this, who he said to ask about, he said, you guys didn't travel light, and food was an important thing. And he asked me to just ask you about your dry ice blue barrel refrigerator.
It actually didn't involve a blue barrel, but it was dry ice. And it was invented, our freezer box. It was a freezer box.
Yeah.
It was a cardboard box that some appliance had come in. Tim Kotcheff and David Silcox deserve tremendous credit for this. They came up with it.
Yeah.
They wrapped this box in all kinds of tape, the kind of tape you use for parcels going in the mail.
Yeah.
And it's around and around, except that you could open the top. Then lined it with crinkled newspaper, and then 2-inch thick styrofoam, so that in the center of this thing was a compartment, probably 10 inches by 10 inches.
Yeah.
What's that, 25 centimeters?
It's not huge, yeah.
Yeah, about a quarter of a cubic, I don't know. It's pretty small.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it would take some meats, some pre-cooked hamburgers, lamb steaks, and lamb cutlets. And actually, the first time we put it to work, some ice cream.
Oh, come on.
And in with all the food
Yeah.
was dry ice, a ball of dry ice about the size of a softball.
Yeah.
And we had on the Hood River, on day 14 on the Hood River, we had Cherries Jubilee, ice cream and canned cherries, it had to be said, and coated in rum, which was then lit. And we had a blue flame for our campfire. We're above the tree line at this point. And it was more of a stunt than anything else. But the result, because of that, we were able to have excellent meals all the way down the river. You take out the next day's food the day before because it would be rock hard and let it thaw as you were paddling down the river during the day. And usually by the evening, the burgers would be thawed and ready to go. But we did not travel light. And so we favored rivers that had very few portages. And unfortunately, or the other thing is, the big portages had to be near the end, not near the end. So fortunately, in the case of the Hood, there's a 5-mile portage around Wilberforce Falls. But by that time, we'd pretty well eaten through everything. And I think we caught char after that.
Oh, that's a hardship.
So we were fine. And same thing on the Burn side. We had just finished and lit the box up. Each time at the end of each trip, we would light the box up and burn it. And that would be the end of it. But it was, now I should tell you, when you're having good food like that, there's nothing for it but to have good wine. So we would have, normally on a normal trip, we were 8 guys.
Yeah.
So we would have 2 bottles of wine with dinner.
Per night.
Always per night for the trip. Now that's where the blue barrel would come in.
Yeah.
As the wines could be in a blue barrel in among all your clothes.
So these aren't decanted or anything.
No, David. And no, these are the real deal to be uncorked.
In the bottle with the corks. That's
preferably French claret or a good Italian Chianti of the highest quality. John McFarlane was our sommelier on a lot of the trips from Toronto, and he knew his onions. He was really good.
He was good. So were you all foodies, as they say nowadays? Or?
Yeah, I think we appreciated good food.
Yeah.
And so Tim Kotcheff and I were invited one year to the Wilderness Canoe Association. We talked about one of the rivers that we did, and then they asked us, would you do a little slideshow on your wilderness cooking?
Yeah.
And so we gave a show, 15 minutes of these spectacular meals.
Yeah.
And you would hear the audience. First they laughed, and then they're groaning.
Yeah.
There was no granola on this trip, and the Wilderness Canoe Association would not have approved of that. And we noticed, Tim and I both noticed, there were several somewhat overweight fellows at lunchtime came around to talk to us about how you do this.
How do you make this work?
So that was one of the great innovations, and it added a zing to the trip. A little bit more zing was added, of course, because Craig Oliver, the bourgeois in charge of us all, would prepare rum daiquiris every night.
Nice.
He had figured out, and it was actually Eric Morris put him onto it, the great canoeist and author of Fur Trade Canoe Routes of Canada, and the guy who was the spark plug in getting wilderness canoeing going again in the 1950s. And Eric told Craig, look, when you get your tent set up and sleeping bags all organized and so on, and the food's pretty well ready to be cooked, then you bang on a pot, call everybody together, and you have a happy hour. And he said, now what you do for happy hour, you want it to be light and potent.
Yeah.
So you get overproof rum, and you can get that in the liquor store in Yellowknife.
Yeah.
And daiquiri mixes, you bring those up from the south in little packages of daiquiri mix. You can buy at Loblaws. And then water from the river. And you mix it all together. And Craig would be in charge, the benevolent dictator, would be in charge of this stuff. And we'd all hang around with our coffee mugs begging for our dollop, our ration of daiquiri and rum. And so he would dollop it out with his cup, dollop it out, have a sip himself, and dollop it up, dollop it out. And it took about 3 trips. And we were on to him. He was refilling his cup every time. So he managed to have 3 times as much as the rest of us.
Bartender's privileges or something.
That's right, exactly. And I remember at one point, the rum was running a little thin, and Peter Stollery, in a rage, saying, Craig, this drink is a placebo.
Oh, my God.
Anyway, it was a great way to travel.
Yeah.
And we were young and crazy enough that we could carry all that stuff across the portage.
A bunch of very high-powered guys on a canoe trip, too. How much competition was there out on that water?
It was, some were journalists, some were politicians, some were political aides and so on, and business people. And so it was a pretty good mix. There wasn't much competition. There was lots of storytelling, rich storytelling, gossip about Toronto particularly, because the media guys knew Toronto inside out, and Ottawa. And so we had some terrific campfire conversation. Of course, in the high Arctic, there's no campfire.
No.
You're just sitting around with your daiquiri. And the only thing to sit on is either a rock or an upturned canoe.
Yes. Hugging your knee.
Until one year, Peter Stollery showed up with a lawn chair.
Oh, yeah.
And the cursing and scowling that went on when this came out of the hold of the plane and when it was too late to reject it. And Peter was going to have his lawn chair. He wanted creature comforts. So the first campfire, first time we're sitting around chewing the fat, we're all struggling to find rocks. And there's Peter with his legs crossed, leaning back in his lawn chair. It didn't take long. Next trip, the following year, there were 8 lawn chairs. And they served, actually, they were very helpful also, keeping packs off the bottom of the canoe. You have your folding lawn chair and then packs on top of it. Raised the center of gravity of the canoe a little bit, but never enough to matter. And your pack stayed dry.
One of the great innovations now are these little 3 legs that fold down to nothing.
Yeah, we had them on the Coppermine.
Oh my God, they're
summer.
wonderful. It was like a purchase we made 2-3 years ago. So it was game changing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially after a certain age, too.
Yeah. The only problem is once you sink into one, it's very hard when you're a certain age to get up and out
especially
of it, as I found.
If the daiquiris are flowing, too. Yeah,
that too. Yeah.
I'd love to know what keeps bringing you back to the Arctic.
It is so spiritual and so moving.
Talk to me about that.
As you cross out of suppose you're flying from Yellowknife into the Barren Lands to say Lodge on the Arctic coast. I remember that trip vividly because it was about 10 years after my last Arctic canoe trip.
Yeah.
And as we crossed the tree line and I started to see the Barren Lands again and the eskers twisting across the land and the hard rock and myriad lakes everywhere. And then as you get closer to Bathurst Inlet, there's a change in the character and you can almost feel it getting colder as you're getting closer to the Arctic coast. And then down for a circle around before landing on the on a little gravel strip there at Bathurst Inlet. And you're circling over, this was early July, and we're circling over ice pans floating in Bathurst Inlet. And then you land, and the smell of the fresh air, absolutely the freshest air anywhere on Earth. A little bit of the sea in the air.
Yeah.
And this real sense, and then when the plane leaves, this magical sense of being on your own. There's nothing, there's nobody, you're alone. All very moving. And the country changes so much in the course of a trip with the sunsets, occasional snow flurries, hot days, cold days, calm water, rough water, and the hiking in the hills, sometimes with beautiful, verdant, barren tundra with grasses growing quite enthusiastically, and in other places, just shattered rock for miles as far as you can see.
It's a magical place.
And sadly, nobody gets to go there. So few Canadians. The rule of thumb is 90% of Canadians never go more than 150 miles from the American border.
I remember I did a course in the Canadian North at Trent University, and John Jennings, who you may know from the Canoe Museum, it was my prof, and he asked our class, it's probably 100 people, who here has been to Florida? And of course, 90% of the people in the room put their hands up, right? And he said, who here has been north of 60? And maybe 200 put their hand up. And he's like, this is your country, people.
Get out there. It is there are places to go. There's some wonderful wilderness lodges. You can now drive the Dempster Highway.
Which is a beautiful drive, too.
And go on up to Tuktoyaktuk, to the Arctic Ocean if you want. So there are parts that are getting more accessible. And also there are some very good stories. I talked earlier about the caribou and the disappearance of the caribou. On the other hand, one thing I noticed, doing the Coppermine, as I may have mentioned, bookends to my canoeing career.
Yeah.
1978 and again in 2025. 1978, almost no raptors, very few birds. We saw one nest of golden eagles in the 320 miles or so that we paddled. And no peregrines. I don't recall seeing a single peregrine. Friends who did the trip the following year said they saw a couple of peregrines and no bald eagles and no broad-winged hawks, for example. This time, we saw, I would say, in total 24 eagles, pretty evenly split between bald and golden. Juveniles, adults, nests in every canyon on the Coppermine River, including the Rocky Defile. And those monster stick nests that the raptors build and the eagles build. Peregrines, we saw 9 peregrine falcons, including a family of 3 who came in and buzzed us, screaming at us in a low pass, carving a tight turn just above us in our canoes. And it was 2 adults and a juvenile. And we watched them hunting back in the hills and still not out of earshot. and flying back and forth. So I asked an ornithologist friend when I got back from the trip, what's happened with the birds? Why are there so many now? Why are the populations so healthy? And he said, my friend Ron Tozer, who used to be the chief naturalist at Algonquin Park, he said, it's DDT. We think it's DDT.
Oh.
DDT had been used as a pesticide in crops all over Western Canada and the U.S. as well. And it was killing the birds, causing them to lay soft eggs. Reproductive success fell off. But DDT was banned in 1975. Amazing. The effect of the ban hadn't really taken hold in 78 when I did the Coppermine the first time. But by 2025, the raptors were back big time. And we saw what the Inuit had seen for thousands of years and what Franklin reported in his journal from the 1820s, plentiful raptors.
Amazing. And it's important to grab those pieces of hope that we have.
Yes,
especially up there.
Exactly. It's a good news Arctic story. And with climate change and with the caribou collapse, there are not many good stories. It's nice to be able to end on a really good one.
Yeah, that is a good one. I'm going to ask you one last question.
Sure, by all means.
Can you describe a favorite place in the Arctic?
Wilberforce Falls, Hood River. I'd say that ranks pretty highly.
Describe that for those who haven't seen it.
If you happen to hit it on a sunny day, you have at the very top this deep pink or red feldspar with the sharp cleavage rock with green water tumbling over the top of the falls. And the falls are maybe 50 or 60 feet wide. And this water roaring over the top, beautiful green in the sunlight against the red. And then falling into, the falls fall in two layers or two stages. It pools after about 75 or 100 feet and then flows out of the pool immediately 6 or 7 feet ahead of that, down into another 100-foot drop into a deep canyon down below. And the canyon is so inaccessible, you have to go down these very steep banks to get down to it. And it would be a real struggle. We didn't even try. And I, of course, was convinced that nobody'd be crazy enough. Step forward, Bill Mason and Wally Shaber. And they took a canoe, hiked it down the very steep bank and paddled from the bottom of the falls on down out. They did get wet. Yeah. They went over at least once. Yeah. But they've paddled that stretch of probably 3 miles, which is like the Niagara Gorge.
My son did that trip with Camp Pure Ontario.
Terrific. He would have.
And he did that portage, which he describes as the most painful.
Quote Saddam Hussein, the mother of all portages.
Exactly. But also just we have the pictures, how stunning.
And if you're lucky enough at night in your tent camped at the top of the falls, you get up, go out for a little bit of walk. Of course, it doesn't get dark at night in the summer. And you may see a small herd of muskox in the hill up above you. We're just grazing, not bothering you. You're not bothering them. And it's absolutely still at night. The Arctic tends to go still like that. The birds in the evening as the sun is going down, dipping. Yeah. You hear the kaleet, kaleet, kaleet of shorebirds and terns and so on. And then it all goes silent as the wind dies. And you're into the Arctic night.
Listen, thank you so much for taking us on these Arctic adventures with you.
Thank you, David. I've enjoyed reminiscing.
Yeah.
Just lifting the lid on some fabulous adventures that we were fortunate and crazy enough to have.
Yeah, very special places.
And I had some really good friends who deserve all the credit for putting these trips together and showing up.
Great. Maybe we'll bring you back with some friends next time.
That'd be fun.
I hope Ted's stories inspire you to pick up a paddle and see Canada the way it is meant to be seen, on the water, in the seat of a canoe, moving at a speed that allows you to appreciate nature and vice versa. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you have a canoe adventure, moment, or mishap you want to share with us, send it in, keep it under 300 words, and it might make it onto the podcast. You can email me at explore@canadiangeographic.ca. If you like this podcast, please share a link of this episode with friends and families and colleagues, and give us a rating and review where you listen, like 5 stars, and really perjure yourselves. It helps us feed the algorithm, which is the beast that guides all of this stuff here in the podcast world. And also subscribe so you don't miss any of our amazing upcoming episodes. Until next time, when we'll explore again, with paddle in hand I'm David McGuffin.
I think right now we're enjoying very much looking back at the Earth, and it's just a fantastic experience, and I just can't wait to get back and start telling people.
We left Simpson about June the 10th with a fur brigade consisting of a number of yacht boats, each manned by 10 voyageurs.
For us Inuit, it means that Inuit oral history is very strong.
And we flew low over every inch of the country that could be. We were hoping that he would fire at us.
I guess 160 yards or so.